It's 2026 and the dog training industry still isn't regulated. Right now, anyone can call themselves a dog trainer, charge you for it, and use methods that cause your dog real and lasting harm. There's no qualification required, no oversight, and no accountability. And the consequences of getting it wrong go further than most people realize. Behaviour problems are one of the leading reasons that dogs are surrendered to shelters, and dogs given up for behavioural reasons are the hardest to rehome and the most likely to be euthanized. Better understanding of training and behaviour can actually change that, but for years the assumption has been that fixing this means waiting for governments to step in and introduce legislation or oversight, or letting the dog training world sort itself out. My guest this week has spent more than 25 years proving that there's actually another way. Niki Tudge is the founder of the Pet Professional Guild, Dognostics Career Centre, and the Dogsmith. When she sees something is broken, she doesn't wait for someone else to fix it. She builds the thing that's missing and gets the community to hold itself to a higher and kinder standard. I came out of this conversation feeling genuinely hopeful because Niki has the data. And it says that the industry is shifting. And it's not because of new regulations or the industry fighting with itself. It is because of the people living with dogs every day. People like you asking better questions and choosing differently. I'm Nadine, and this is Just a Dog Podcast. Let's begin.
I grew up in a household of two professional parents and a brother who was seriously asthmatic. So we did not have any pets at all because our house was sealed from allergens. So it wasn't until I was, I think, 21 that I got my first pet, which was a cat, funnily enough.
Oh, okay. So when did your journey with dogs begin?
In 2000. I had cats. Well, I grew up with cats probably until I was 3. And then my parents realized my brother was seriously asthmatic and that was what was triggering it. So we then didn't have any pets at all. And when I left home, the first thing I did when I left home was got myself 2 cats, and they traveled everywhere. And I moved to London and they lived in London with me. And then when I was 24, I think I was transferred from a job that I had in London and went to work at the Sandy Lane Hotel in Barbados, which was my first international job. And then years after that was still traveling, so could never have animals. It wasn't fair to have animals. And then I spent 4 years in Egypt. And in my second year in Egypt, I was walking down the high street in Cairo, and somebody was walking along the high street with this Persian cat just sitting on top of their shoulder. And I was like, oh my goodness, because Cairo is a crazy city. I mean, that was just looking at that was just unbelievable. And I stopped them and they were actually walking this cat to a pet store. They wanted to sell it. And I was like, it's mine. So I escorted them to the pet store and I bought this Persian. And this Persian then traveled all over Africa with me in first class on a plane. Went to Nigeria, then went to South Africa, and then ended up with me in the States. And then I actually lost her 23 years later. So had her for many, many years. She traveled all over the world with me.
How difficult was that? Are cats allowed on flights?
Yeah, she would sit, and my company always flew me first class or business class, and she would sit in a little carrier on the seat next to me.
How lovely.
Yeah, it was
wonderful.
Yeah.
So you started your career, your working life in hospitality, is that correct?
No. All right. I have reinvented myself multiple times. I left school at 16 initially. Both my parents were university professors. And so you can imagine growing up in our household, everything was about education. And I just pushed back against it significantly. Didn't enjoy school other than the athletic side of school. Didn't enjoy studying. My brother went on to do a PhD in nuclear physics. So he went the same route as my parents. And it wasn't until I was about 22 that I actually went back to school and did my O-levels and A-levels, and then went back to university part-time. And then in 2000 went back and did my master's degree through Oxford. For many, many years before that, I just flitted around doing all kinds of things, just enjoying life. I left home when I was 16 and a half, got on a train and moved down to London, and that was the end of that. So I was always very independent and I always wanted to travel. Travel was always a real priority for me. And hotels opened that door for me because I could go all over the world. And most of my assignments were 2-year assignments, which is why I got so much exposure to so many different countries, because literally you would fly in, do a job, and then move on elsewhere.
What were those assignments? What were you doing?
And I was actually a regional director of training and development for management. So, which is why transitioning into the dog industry was so easy for me, because it wasn't until I met my husband in Nigeria. He was working with the US Department of State. He then moved to South Africa. I followed him a year later, and we got married a year after that. And then he retired at 40. And when he retired, he had to come back to the US as part of his exit. That the US government insists that you come back and do an exit from your career. So I came back with him and was offered a position in Hawaii, which was the very first job I had in the US. And yeah, I mean, it sort of all just came from that. And it wasn't, and then I got my first dog in 2000. I was like, whoa, okay, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. We're not traveling anymore. So I'm going to get myself a dog, and got a puppy with no understanding or expectations. And literally, it was the only thing my husband and I have ever almost divorced over, because he did not want animals and I did. And I just went, well, I'm getting one. And he said, well, I don't want one. And I said, well, I do. So I just went out and got a puppy, which was, in hindsight, was actually quite selfish, because I worked 16-hour days and he was at home. So after about a month, this dog was just crazy, 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 because we had no understanding of expectations or anything. Did everything wrong. And I phoned a dog trainer and said, you need to come here immediately. I've got this aggressive puppy on my hands. I don't know what I'm going to do. And even though it was giving us all kinds of problems, I've always been a big believer that once you accept a responsibility, you deal with it. You don't just, abdicate that responsibility to somebody else. So there was never a question of rehoming or anything. It was always going to be, we're going to figure this out. And the puppy wasn't unruly. The puppy was just being a normal puppy, right? So I phoned a dog trainer and she came up, and I literally said, you have to come tonight. It doesn't matter what it costs, just get here. And she turned up and she just started laughing. She goes, you've got a lovely 8-week-old puppy. What's the problem? And I said, well, it's biting me and it's peeing everywhere and it's chewing on things. And funnily enough, this individual dog trainer is now a member of the Pet Professional Guild. And when I met, I was a hotel executive and she was a dog trainer in Hawaii. And it's funny because what is that, like 25 years later, we sort of came back in contact again when we started PPG. So yeah, but that was when I realized that there were so many similarities between training and developing people and working with animals, because the learning theory, the psychology, is all the same. The underlying learning theory is exactly the same.
You mentioned a couple of things that I think many dog guardians or first-time dog owners kind of fall into. First, the impulsiveness. Secondly, potentially not necessarily considering the time and dedication that it takes. And then also the expectation of kind of quick turnarounds, quick fixes. Yeah. I find that really interesting, because I think all of us kind of have these ingrained ideas. And I'm also curious about kind of where those things came from. What was your knowledge of dogs before you got the puppy, and how did that change after you started taking care of it?
I had zero knowledge. And I remember coming home from work, and I'd said to my husband, I wanted a puppy, and he was like, oh God. And I found a puppy in the newspaper, $50 she cost me. She actually cost me about $150,000 after we'd finished with new houses and farms and training centers, because she was the catalyst for everything else. And I literally got in my car and drove to Waimea and picked this dog up from someone's backyard, paid $50, picked this dog up, put her on my lap and drove home. No food, no crate, nothing. I mean, jokes aside, people do this on a daily basis with animals. And I remember my husband looking at me and said, I can't believe you've done this, because I'm quite a strategic control type person. I don't usually do things impulsively like that without putting a lot of thought behind what I'm doing. And I mean, preparing the battlefield, so to speak. And he said to me, he said, I can't believe you've done this. You've brought a sentient being into our house that could potentially live 20 years. And you've spent less time thinking about this than you have planning a family vacation. And years later, that actually became the title of a blog that I did, because I thought, you know what, I'm not unusual. This is how a lot of people get puppies. They go to backyard breeders, they pay for dogs, they've no idea what they're buying, they've no expectation, they don't know what equipment. They just think, and I'd grown up in the UK where everybody I knew had dogs. And as a child, you don't think about everything that goes, you just see the finished product and think, what a lovely family pet. Yeah. And in the UK growing up, animals were everywhere. I mean, we would be sitting in our home in Poynton and the neighbour's dog would walk past the window and my dad would go, oh, there's Scruffy. And my mum would go, oh, he's off to meet his mum, who was a local school teacher. The dog would, trollop off down to the school and walk back with mum, because we were not a litigious society, and dogs we didn't have the sort of same problems that people have imposed on dogs that we have now. And it wasn't until I moved to Hawaii that I realized that not everybody, treated animals like that. And I was very surprised when I got to the US because the culture was quite different about dogs. I mean, there was an expectation when I spoke to people at work about my puppy that I would just pop a shock collar on her or just, punish her. And I was like, we don't do that in England. We don't punish our pets because we didn't. I mean, you wouldn't think about physically or emotionally harming an animal. And I remember saying to my husband, if we just have to live with this, we're going to have to live with it. This is our responsibility now. We've got this puppy. We're not throwing her away or giving her to rescue. We're just going to have to deal with it. And at the time, my husband being an engineer went onto Amazon and bought all 3 books on raising a puppy. There were 3 books on raising a puppy. There was The Monks of New Skeet, which is still around to this day, that still discusses the dominance myth and, the ridiculousness of that. And then there was Brian Killamore, who was very much a punitive trainer. And then there was, I remember her name, the English lady, Walkies. What was her name? Barbara Woodhouse.
Right.
Yeah. And they were the only 3 books back in 2000 that you could buy on puppy training. And they were all punishment-based books. And I read them and just went, no, I'm not doing this. And I didn't know enough. I didn't know anything about the ethology of animals or the neuroscience or about biology of learning. I knew the science of learning theory and operant conditioning and Pavlovian conditioning. But knowing that academically and then implementing that in a punitive manner just didn't sit well with me. I was like, no, we're not doing this. This does not sound right. So when we finally met Tammy, who was the dog trainer that I'd called over this puppy was a Kelpie, which was the other ridiculous thing about it, because I literally went out and bought the worst dog. I mean, this is a dog that is bred to work independently, travel hundreds of miles in Australia. This is like the border collie on cocaine. I mean, this is not a dog that you keep in your house. And the only reason we survived with this dog is that both my husband and I are ultra runners. So this dog got a lot of exercise because we were going out for an hour, 2 hours every day on the trails with her. And if we hadn't have had that, I don't know what would have happened, because she was at least getting an outlet for the physical requirements and the enrichment, even though there was nothing else sort of in place. So not only did I purchase a dog from a backyard breeder, but I bought a dog that was designed to, travel many, many miles each day herding livestock. And then I sort of looked at this dog and thought, well, why are you not assimilating into my home after 2 days? What's going on? What are you doing? So yeah, we made every mistake in the book we made with that puppy, which is bizarre because that puppy started everything. It was probably about a year later that I started doing agility with her and just loved it. And the woman that I was doing agility with had a dog club. So I started teaching with her and I just became obsessed with animal behavior. Absolutely obsessed with it. And then my husband had been out sailing one day. He was bringing a boat from Honolulu over to the Big Island where we live with some friends of his. So he was gone all day and half the night. And he got home that night about 11 o'clock. And I went, don't hate me, but I bought a house in Hawaii, in Florida. I said, we're moving to Florida. And he's like, what? And I said, yeah, because for about a year, I'd been thinking about the fact that ever since I'd got this dog and started working with dogs and sort of training her, that just became, I suddenly realized that was where I was enjoying myself. That was where I felt most fulfilled. That was where I wanted to spend all my time. And I just finished my master's degree, actually. And my husband was like, hang on a minute, what's going on? You just finished a master's degree and now you want to just get out of the industry. And I said, yeah, I'm done. This is what I want to do. I want to work with animals. So I was online that day and found this house in Florida, in the Florida Panhandle, that was on auction. And I thought, I'm buying that. It was not expensive. I'm back because Hawaii was very expensive. So in comparison, it was nothing. So we bought the house and about 3 months later, we moved the dog, the cat and everybody over to Florida.
For a person who's quite controlled and calculated and strategic.
Yeah. And that was where, so that dog Dobie, that was how it all started. That was how it all started. So I have my first business and off we went.
So Dobie, so you started doing agility with your Kelpie and then you discovered that you really, really enjoy it. At what point was there a point in that journey where you started looking at the dog as more than a pet?
I think I always had, because she was always my running partner. So she was always more than just a pet, and she went everywhere with us. So, I mean, you say just a pet. A pet for me has a very special role. My husband and I were with our running club this morning, and somebody looked at me and said, you have dogs, don't you? And I said, yeah, I have fur kids. And they just sort of looked at me and I said, what, you? They said, no. I said, skin kids. And they were like, yeah. But they sort of looked at me as if to say, well, And I said, no, they're my kids. I mean, these are my kids, right? I mean, I spend all day with them and we train and we run together and we do agility and we do scent work. I mean, they're a really important part of my life, and I don't have children. And I think I always recognized emotionally many, many years ago that they were always an outlet for that sort of nurturing, caring side of our personality. So yeah, we can say they're just pets, but for me, pets are still family members. I mean, they're sentient beings. And it's one of the concepts that we struggle with in the US is the terminology. Are we guardians? Are we owners? Are we parents? Because legally, they are objects and have no more legal rights than this cup of coffee, which is actually not a bad thing. A lot of people sort of want to argue for giving pets rights. And I think we've got to be careful what we ask for, because the minute we do that, then the liability issues become more complicated and the ownership issues become more complicated. My business partner at Diagnostics lives in Spain, Louise, and Spain has just recognized them as being family members. So they're already having all kinds of complexities in divorce cases and because they're no longer a legal object, they are considered, to have their own sort of rights and feelings, which of course they do. But how does that materialize, or how does that manifest legally? It's quite a complicated question.
It is, yeah, but it could potentially change the approach, right? So,
Right.
also in Spain, for example, Galgo, so my foster dog is from Spain.
Right.
She's considered a tool. She's part of the agricultural
Yeah.
department.
Yeah.
There's no rights for her at all. So, yeah, that kind of informs how they
Yeah.
are treated overall.
Absolutely.
What was it that made you decide that you wanted to dedicate all your time, all your life to working with dogs?
So Elena, who I was working with, who had a dog club, she had a dog club, but it was very casual. And my role was the development of training programs and leadership development. So I came from a sort of an institutionalized educational background. So when I met with her, I said, okay, why don't we formalize this a bit more? Let's get a bit more strategic in what we're doing here. So we started rolling out workshops and we did programs, and a lot of them were at the weekend, because obviously I had a full-time job. And I remember one weekend we did an introduction to dog agility, and we had about 15 people there. And I remember we were doing sort of group exercises. And I remember standing there talking to a group of people. We sort of introduced this academic concept, and then we were showing them one at a time, and they were demonstrating. And I remember standing there thinking, God, this is so much more fun than being in a stuffy Ritz-Carlton ballroom teaching 300 people about leadership traits. And I had this pinnacle moment where I just thought, if I'm going to work in sort of education, how much more fun is this being out on a dirty, muddy, wet field than being in a 5-star hotel and I always felt with my job that I was masking, because I was very athletic. I was a real tomboy. And yet in the work environment, I used to put 6-inch heels on and makeup and lipstick and put these designer suits on and trollop off to work. And as soon as I got home, they got ripped off and jeans and t-shirts went back on. And I remember once in Hawaii, the management played a softball game with the staff, and I turned up in my sort of sports gear, and so many people came up to me and went, oh my God, because they'd only ever seen me in this sort of very formal hair in a bun type environment. And I was like, this is the real me. This is who I am. I always felt like going to work was putting a costume on. So when I was working with dogs and was out training, I actually felt I was wearing the clothes that I would have been wearing if I was just on my own time. So I actually felt like this was real me, rather than this very formal corporate character that had to evolve every single day. So I think that was when I sort of really thought about it. And my husband had just retired from a really good career with the US State Department. And I remember, so our move to Hawaii was the first place we'd lived where he was not working. And I used to go off to work every day thinking, God, this is really unfair. Because, I worked long hours. It was high pressured environment. And I suddenly realized that if I'd continued on in that career, it was going to be very, very difficult for us to do vacations and holidays, because my time was so absorbed in the hotel, that I think I realized that if I worked for myself, that I was going to have a lot more flexibility over my schedule, which was really beneficial, because my husband was only 40. It wasn't like he was a 75-year-old that didn't really want to do anything. We were still both very much in sort of the peak of our lives. It was a practical consideration in terms of working hours, pressure, but it was also, this is what I want to do from just an absolute enjoyment perspective. I just really enjoyed it.
And so when you started working with dogs within the kind of training industry, what were some of your observations in terms of how people approached it?
I think When I first started, I mean, obviously I was English. I came from the UK. I've not had my own pets before other than a couple of cats. And in Hawaii, the dog training that I was exposed to was quite progressive because Tammy, who was the dog trainer that helped me, had come from the marine park in Honolulu, where all of it was operant conditioning, positive reinforcement, because you can't get into a pool and physically coerce a dolphin or a whale to do something. And it wasn't until I moved to Florida that I was exposed to this very harsh, cruel side of our industry where dogs were chained up outside and were used as functional tools for hunting, and they weren't cared for, and there was no enrichment, there was no empathy. So it wasn't until I got to Florida that I realized, oh my goodness, there is a whole other side of this industry that I haven't been exposed to, that I really didn't like. And we were living in quite a rural area of Northwest Florida. So a lot of backyard dogs, a lot of hunting dogs. And I think that's when I sort of recognized that there was this massive culture clash, for want of a better expression, to steal from Jean Donaldson's book, over that there's very different approaches, very, very different approaches to animals. There was the sort of my type of approach that was, this is a family member and we care about it and we recognize that these are captive animals. Therefore, we have a responsibility to make sure that all their needs and their welfare needs are met, versus the functionality of, it's just a dog in the backyard and by God, it will do what I want it to do. And that was when I realized that those two worlds didn't just clash on a pet ownership level, but also clash significantly from a professional perspective, that professionals tended to sit on one side of that line or the other. And it wasn't until several years later that I became more engrossed in the industry in the US, where I realized how harsh it was, that I just thought that we have to try and do something about this. I'm not okay just accepting that I'm part of an industry where a significant number of my peers are harming dogs on a daily basis, under the name of training.
What do you think is influencing those choices based on your conversations and experiences?
That is such a loaded question, and it's such a complicated question. And the Pet Professional Guild, last year, we actually invested $35,000 into a research project on this very topic. And Jamie Delarue, who did the research for us, we're just waiting now for the paper to be published in a journal. I think some of the results actually quite surprised us, because all the professionals that were interviewed were all chosen from directories where we were fairly sure that they were balance trainers. They weren't using positive reinforcement. I understand my side of the industry. I deal with people. I manage organizations that have thousands of members in them that are using positive reinforcement based protocols. And I think one of the most surprising things to me is that there's always been a hypothesis that if you use harmful training methods, that you're an ass and that you don't care about dogs and you don't care about them as sentient beings. And that's actually not true. Many of them did quite categorically vocalize through many different types of questioning, so they weren't, manipulated, that they really do care about dogs and they care about them and they have a lot of empathy for them. So I don't know. I mean, I sometimes wonder if it's white privilege and our access to the education, to the culture of, I talk about the culture I came from with animals. Well, not everybody comes from that culture where animals are just brought into a house as a pet. And I'm just going to digress a minute to give you a good example. When I lived in Hawaii, we had neighbors that had a Catahoula, and he was an outdoor dog. And when he wasn't with his owner, he was chained. And when we first moved into the house, I was quite judgmental about our neighbors and thought, well, probably not very nice people, don't really want to get to know them. That poor dog's outside chained. And then as I sort of got to know them and I observed them, the dog went out with Hannah every day to work. He worked as a utility man for the state. And the dog got lots of exercise. He was with Hannah for, 16 hours a day. And it wasn't until the dog died that I realized, I came home from work one day to find my neighbor, who was this massive macho Hawaiian man, lying on his driveway in floods of tears because he just had to euthanize his dog. And I remember sort of taking a second look and thinking, well, you can't be that emotionally connected. The dog didn't even live in your house. The judgment was that this was a tool. It was a dog that he hunted with. It was a dog that, yes, he exercised it well, but he didn't train it necessarily. It wasn't in the home. It wasn't, enjoying family time. But when the dog died, he was as devastated as I would have been if my dog had died. So that was when I realized that there are different cultures and different expectations and different conditioning about what role animals play in our life. And it doesn't mean that somebody else values that dog any less than I do. It just means that they have a different cultural expectation as to the role that dog plays. I mean, he used to laugh at me because on a Sunday I would throw my dog, not literally, but we'd both jump in my little Rav and off we'd go to training. And he'd go, "Oh, you're going to go in training?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." And and he was like mocking me. I could sense it in his voice. And as I pulled out of my driveway with my dog sitting in the front seat with her seatbelt on, I'm sure he thought, "Oh, bloody Howley, white English woman, how ridiculous." And so there was judgment on both sides, but it didn't impact the fact or change the fact that we both loved our dogs and both had very strong relationships with our dogs and spent a lot of time with our dogs. It's just that it was a different relationship. So, I mean, and you also look at dog sports people. I mean, I know people who do dog sports that have 8 or 9 dogs and they live in their house and they're rotated through crates because they can't have 8 border collies running around the house. And they say they're family pets, but I look at that and think, well, that's not how my dogs live. I mean, my dogs live free in my house and they do whatever they want because they don't damage things. They're trusted in the house. There's been a lot of investment in training to make sure that they can enjoy the home in the same way that we do. So we sort of look at certain cultures and certain types of dog and we think, well, that's not right. But I know family pets that live awful, miserable lives that never leave their postage stamp backyard and don't have any training or any enrichment or any attention. So I think sometimes we sort of look at, working dogs or sports dogs and think, well, they're not, it's not the same as my dog. But there's a lot of pet dogs that are not living good lives as well.
Mhm.
It's a tough question. And why do people do that? I don't know. I've always believed from a professional perspective that there's sort of a myopia there, that professionals that are harsh with dogs possibly don't understand canine communication and social behavior to the level they should, because I, I find it really difficult to comprehend why somebody would continue with an intervention or continue training a dog if the dog is, even in the mildest or most moderate ways, communicating that they're not okay with what's being done. So surely a professional that does care about an animal would stop and go, "This isn't good. Maybe I need some more education." Doesn't always happen, but so I don't know. It's a really difficult question. If I had the answer for that question, then I would solve this industry in a few days. But yeah.
Yeah, well, it's an exploration more than anything because it's it can be such a polarizing topic.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, there's loads of factors that influence and contribute to people taking actions. For some, it's control, and control
Yeah.
means love. Control means safety. There's also misogyny in there. There's so many historical things that shapes the perception of how we end up treating animals. But that's not to say that we don't love them. Like I spoke with a balance trainer earlier on in the podcast, and he was, he loves his dog and he believes it's his duty to be a partner to his dog. And as part of that partnership is to tell the dog when it's crossing a boundary. And the way that he does that, well, he mentioned a couple of ways, but for me, I immediately felt something and I said, "Oh, I'm feeling things over here. Like that doesn't sit well with me." But to him, he didn't hesitate because in his mind, it was framed as his duty.
Yeah. And there's this strong argument that and one of the and this is a topic that we constantly talk about in our industry, is some of the myths that are circulate, and the balanced dog trainers that say, well, dogs are being euthanized all the time because positive reinforcement doesn't work. Well, first of all, let's reframe that, because positive reinforcement is a scientific concept. It works. What might not work is the way it's being applied or the way it's being practiced or the skill level of the person that's doing it. But if positive reinforcement is executed properly, using differential reinforcement or counter conditioning, you don't need to physically or emotionally harm an animal. I mean, we see it every day in the zoological world. We see lions, offering paws for blood draws. I mean, if we can do that with a lion, we don't need to wrangle and harm a dog to teach it to sit down, stay calm. I mean, we just don't. There's a passionate argument if you're too permissive with dogs and they sort of go past those boundaries, then they may be euthanized. But, positive doesn't mean permissive. I was raised in a family where my parents never raised a hand, which back in the 60s was actually quite progressive because most kids got spanked at some point, right?
Mhm.
My parents never raised a hand. We had discussion moments where if you were behaving like an ass, you were sat down and there was a discussion. Now, there's a cognitive process to that, which you can't do with animals. But from a modification of behavior, we know that punishment, harsh punishment, has lots of unintended consequences. And often trying to solve one issue, you end up creating a whole bunch of additional issues that can be worse to the animal and to you than the initial issue that you're trying to resolve. So the science is very clear in terms of how we should be approaching behavior modification and training. So I don't know, because it's really difficult for me because I'm not a big believer in massive government oversight either. Not in areas where where it's not their speciality. So I do think our industry needs oversight, but I think it needs professional oversight from within the industry, not from external factors, because licensing, particularly in the US, is never going to be a federal issue. It's always going to be done by states, and the states are never going to agree on what that looks like. And often licensing is just about money, and therefore everybody's grandfathered in. So all you then do is legitimize the really bad trainers, because now they've got a license, they are now considered legitimate. So it's a really tough question. And I mean, a lot of people start to feel a bit helpless. I feel really positive about our industry because we started PPG in 2011. And at the time, it was the only organization that had guiding principles that categorically stated that no aversive equipment is used in the training or behavior modification of a pet. And when we started it, we had so much pushback from the industry about how ridiculously we were and how extreme we were and how it would never work. Well, over the last 10 years, we have watched all the other organizations move their position statements, and now they're almost where ours is. So, the industry is moving, that there is a lot of pressure. And from a client perspective, you have a much more educated consumer now. I mean, 10 years ago, I didn't get people calling me saying, I'm looking for a positive reinforcement trainer. They called you because you happen to be close by. Now, customers are doing their own due diligence. They don't know what they want, but they know academically what they do not want. And most educated consumers do not want their pets being harmed. You don't get a dog or a cat to harm it. You don't.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. But then there's also a perception of what harm looks like, right? An ex-colleague of mine recently sent their dog away. It's this Newfoundland puppy who lives in New York, as in New York, in an apartment. And they sent the dog off for training for a week. And apparently the dog came back and different dog. And that scares the hell out of me because, they are thinking they did the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
I had a look because they tagged the trainers in and I saw shock collars. My heart hurt because these are really well-educated, very cultured, well-traveled individuals. How could they not know? I think what I tend to see is that as much as I like to believe that people are making more informed decisions, in my immediate world, I'm not actually seeing the evidence of that. Maybe because I don't work with dogs directly and I don't have exposure to people who care to that degree. But I think the average person, they're not aware of these things. At least I'm not seeing it.
I have a lot of very good friends, and all my friends are actually still in the UK, and most of them are pet owners, and I've watched them move positions over the last few years. But I don't think the UK was ever quite as extreme as the US either, because there's not a prevalence. I spend 3 weeks in the UK every year. Last year, I was there my husband and I ran the full length of the Thames River from the source to the barriers. And I journaled all the dogs I met along the way. It was a lovely way of sort of, meeting and greeting people. It was lovely for me because over the space of 14 days, I saw 2 dogs on choke collars. Everyone else was on a harness. And that for me was lovely, because if I'd have done that same journey in the US, that would have been the absolute opposite.
Wow.
Yeah. The dogs would have been on shock collars, prong collars, choke collars. So, and my girlfriend who I grew up with, who went to school with, we owned an apartment in Richmond for years and years, and Richmond Park was where we used to walk. And whenever I go back there, that's where we still walk her dog. And whenever I'm in Richmond Park, I'm always overjoyed by the number of animals I see off leash, how well behaved they are, how well they're interacting together, because I've never seen that in the US.
And Richmond Park is full of deer as well. There are wild animals roaming freely. Yeah. That's incredible.
There's bicycles and runners and groups of school kids. I mean, it's not a park where you're not going to see anybody. I mean, if you go there in the morning, especially if you go to Roehampton or Richmond, around the housing areas, there's hundreds of people in there enjoying the parks. Yeah.
So what are some of your observations? I mean, UK, US, so visually you've made some observations, but culturally, what have you noticed in terms of the differences when it comes to dogs specifically?
The UK is a lot more dog friendly in terms of where you can take your animals. I mean, there's nothing nicer than going into a country pub and there's half a dozen dogs just roaming around, right? In the beer gardens or actually inside the building. You don't see that in the US. I mean, more so now. I lived in Panama City in Florida in 2008 when they first started allowing dogs into not into restaurants but outside of restaurants on seating areas, because we immediately started filling up all our workshops for doggy dining. Come and learn how your dog can behave in restaurants. That was very popular. Because up until that point, dogs just were not allowed in public spaces. I worked with an organization that got the first dog beach on the Emerald Coast opened and one of the first dog parks. And that was between 2008, 2010. Well, in that era, going back to the UK, that type of thing was already in the UK. Not so much dog parks, because dogs were allowed to go to most public parks anyway, but not in the US. There was an expectation. And I don't know whether it was because culturally Americans are different. I think it was probably more to do with the litigious side of the society here, that if your dog bites somebody, there's a huge level of responsibility, where in the UK, there wasn't a lot of consequences other than, animal control maybe knocking on your door. But dogs, I think, were better socialized in the UK because they grew up with access to those types of outlets. Whereas I remember in the US, when we opened a dog park on the Emerald Coast in Florida, and I was on the board of the organization that opened this dog park. And I'd only been involved in the dog industry about 5 years. And so didn't know what I didn't know. I knew more than the other board members, but I wouldn't have said that I was a highly experienced practitioner. And we sat at this board meeting and we were talking about the grand opening. And they were talking about inviting several hundred people to bring their dogs for this dog park opening. It was only 5 acres. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is not good. This is not a good situation at all. And I voiced my opinion and was voted down, because what would be a dog park when normally you'd have, 10 or 15 dogs in there at any given time? Suddenly you were going to have a couple of hundred dogs charging around with the owners. And we went to the grand opening and I actually hovered on the outside of it. I mean, I spent the whole hour like this, like, oh my God. Because you literally had hundreds of people coming out with their dogs that were not socialized, probably hadn't seen another dog for years, didn't even get daily walks. And suddenly the owners were taking them out of the cars and just tossing them into this 5-acre piece of field with a bunch of other dogs and just saying, off you go, be free. And I just thought, oh my God, this is a recipe for disaster.
Was it?
There were a couple of issues. It wasn't as bad as I'd anticipated, because I think dogs often do that. They surprise us, don't they? And how resilient and how smart they are. But I remember, and my husband and I just stood there going, oh my God, because the owners were all sitting on benches, drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes. Some people had cans of beer there and didn't even know where their dogs were, right? I mean, this is 5 acres. This isn't someone's backyard. This is quite a large piece of land that had landscaping and trees and a little forested area. So once you were in there, you could lose sight of your dog very quickly. And I just remember, and the president of the organization was walking around and I remember saying, Pat, are you not worried? She goes, I'll be fine. And I was just like, oh, God.
That's incredible.
When you work with animals, you know what can go wrong. And when it goes wrong, it can go wrong pretty quickly and it can go wrong pretty dramatically. Let me put it like this. I didn't take my dogs that night. My dogs were at home.
Well, probably a good idea. You were so nervous and worried about all the other ones. I'm sure they would have picked up on that.
But I wouldn't have put my dogs with a bunch of unsocialized dogs. I mean, one incident you can spend years rehabilitating your dog from it.
Hi, sorry to interrupt your listening. I wanted to ask you, please, while you're here, can you subscribe? Can you follow? Can you share this podcast with a friend? I would really appreciate it because it keeps the podcast growing. Momentum is always good, and it helps me to book better guests so we can have more conversations, really. So yeah, I'd really appreciate it if you could. Thank you. Right, back to the show. I read somewhere that you spent some time in Africa doing welfare work.
Wow.
I would love to know a bit more about that. And then also, I guess, how that informed your work with dogs now.
When my husband went to South Africa, I was in Nigeria, running a hotel in Nigeria, and I had a 3-year contract. So I followed him a year later. In Nigeria, I managed a hotel that was completely independent. It was a Hilton International, but it was on 300 acres. We had our own, because it was in the middle of Nigeria, in Abuja, which was a brand new town that they'd actually developed it as the capital because it was geographically right in the middle of the country. So it wasn't influenced by Christians or Muslim. They felt it was sort of a neutral environment. So a lot of the embassies moved in first. And because of that, there were some big hotels there. We had our own security department that had their own Alsatian German Shepherd breeding program. Everything was it was all done in-house because you couldn't just pick up a phone and order something. And I remember about a month after I'd moved in with Rick, I came home one night carrying a little German Shepherd puppy. I was like, oh, we've got a dog. And he's like, no, I don't think so. Take it back. Because he already had a dog, which had been a German Shepherd police dog that had failed its final graduation. So we did have a German Shepherd dog there. And I remember at the time being quite horrified. And the reason I brought this puppy home is because I was horrified by the way it was living, because they were all living in these really dirty, dingy kennels, right at the back of the property. But then when I got to South Africa, I got involved with doing some business consulting for some game lodges. So as part of that, got involved in welfare. But most of my welfare work with animals was actually through fauna and flora, which was done in Nigeria, because I have to be careful what I say now because I'm not sure Hilton would want this going public. When I first got to the hotel, we had a children's zoo at the hotel. And the children's zoo had in it chimpanzees, monkeys, crocodiles, deer, and a lot of the animals in there had been poached. That was how the hotel had them. And I was assigned to the job from our corporate office. I'd actually come down from Egypt. I was at a hotel in Egypt. And when I was talking to my boss, who was at head office in London, and I told him, he was like, you are joking. This is a PR nightmare. This beautiful hotel in the middle of Africa has got this kids' petting zoo. And I just met Rick. And through Rick, I'd met some people from the Peace Corps who were with us in Nigeria, but were going back and forth to Cameroon to the Jane Goodall Chimpanzee Center, funnily enough. And he said to me, why don't you talk to them? They might be able to help you to get these animals rehomed. And I said to my boss, we've got to close. This is ridiculous. This has got to close. We can't have this open. If the wrong person, ethically it wasn't right, but if the wrong person finds out, this could be a PR disaster. So my boss in London said, get rid of them, close it. So Paul and Susan, their names were, who actually years later got married, now live in Texas. Paul was Nigerian and Susan was there with the Peace Corps, and he was there as a local representative from Fauna and Flora. So we actually shipped these chimpanzees down to the Cameroon border, where they went into a chimpanzee rehabilitation camp. So that was how I got involved with welfare, because we had to find homes for all these animals, and we had to work with a lot of organizations to sort of ship them out. So I've always loved animals. I recognized as a child, my parents always loved animals. When I first moved to Florida, we had a pet cow, we had horses, donkeys, ducks, geese, peafowl. We had a massive menagerie. And the first time my parents came over, I remember looking at my dad, and my dad stood in the middle of this field with a red bucket picking up cow dung. And I remember looking at him going, oh my God, he's in his element. And I remember walking over to him saying, are you okay? And he's like, oh, I'd love to live like this. He looked like the little British farmer with his little tweed cap on and his Wellington boots. And that's when I first realized that my father was a massive animal advocate. We just never had them because we couldn't have them because of my brother. Yeah. But was massively into animals. Just loved them. I would look out the kitchen window and he'd be out there in the pasture just rubbing on Blackie's head. This big black Angus cow that came with the property. So there was obviously something in my DNA. The entire family loves animals, and my brother loves animals as well. He just can't spend any time with them. So, as I got older and I started being exposed to them more and more, I realized that, and probably, knowing what I know now, if I had my time again, I probably would go into zoological biology or something, or I would definitely do something working with animals, not domestic or, with wild animals. I'd do something along those. My husband and I often talk now about just packing it all in and going off and working with Peace Corps and going and counting puffins, in polar bears somewhere.
I think what I'm noticing here is there's a common thread in terms of the business acumen, the training and the teaching, and then the advocacy or the welfare work, and then also the dog training side of things. Those skills transferred quite nicely over into the Pet Professional Guild, right? I would like to understand what the Pet Professional Guild is. Kind of how it came about and what you saw in the industry that made this necessary.
First of all, to get to PPG, we have to talk about the Dog Smith, because when we moved to Florida, I opened up my own dog training facility, and it grew really quickly. And it didn't grow because of my brilliant dog training skills. It grew because I had a business background and knew what I was doing with running a business. And I came from a very corporate, I used to work in Six Sigma. So I came from a very statistical analysis, quality control area. And I just operationalized everything everything. I had like 15 manuals written for every aspect of my business because that was just what I did. And I was talking to a friend of mine one day from Chicago, and he said to me, why don't you franchise it? And I said, why? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you've operationalized it all. Franchise it. So we did. So we franchised the Dogsmith, and for 5 years we franchised it, and it actually grew too big for where we were living. So we had to relocate to Oxford, Mississippi. And we bought an animal hospital and veterinary facility and a boarding facility and dog park on 10 acres of land. And the whole family moved down there as the Dogsmith headquarters. And that was when PPG was founded. Because on Saturday, I had to run into PetSmart to pick up some supplies. The resort had run out of a few things, and we wouldn't normally have gone to PetSmart to buy our operational equipment, but we had to. And when I went in there, I heard a dog screaming. And I sort of immediately, like, my ears went up and I just got this visceral, like, oh my God. And as I walked around the store, like looking, I realized that there was a training session taking place down one of the aisles. And there were 3 people with dogs and a woman teaching these people that if your dog reacts towards the other dog, hang them and hold them in the air on a leash. And I looked at that, and this dog was screaming. And I immediately went racing to the front of the store and asked to speak to the manager. Because I didn't know a lot about PetSmart, but I did know that their training curriculum did not include that, because one of our Dogsmiths had come from PetSmart training, and I had read the PetSmart training curriculum for dog trainers. And the manager came over and I said to him, and we could hear this dog. And I said, can somebody explain what the hell's going on over there? This is cruelty. And he said, well, I don't know. It's not one of our sanctioned classes. It's one of our trainers who's doing some private work here. And I said, well, I don't give a shit who it is or how you know them, but this is happening in your facility, and that these dogs are in pain. And he immediately looked at me and said, I don't know what to tell you. So I said, well, I suggest you go there and stop it. And he said, well, I can't do that. She's on her own time. I said, but she's in your facility. This is your facility. You're the manager. And he wouldn't do anything. And I remember I had this massive shopping cart piled full of dog food and toys and all kinds of stuff. And I literally just dumped it and walked out. And my husband was parked outside in our work truck. And as I locked eyes with him, I just burst into absolute floods of tears. It makes me cry just thinking about it now.
Oh, yeah.
I just burst into floods of tears. And he got out of the car and came running over. He's like, what happened? He thought somebody had like sexually abused me or something, because I was just in, floods of tears. And he could hear, and I said, just listen. And he could hear these dogs like reacting one minute and then screaming the next. And he said, well, and I said, I have to go. We got in the car and we left. And I got back and I phoned PetSmart corporate office. And of course, it was on a Saturday. Nobody answered. I called them again on the Monday, never got a call back. I emailed them, never got a response. And I remember one night, and we'd only been there about 3 months. And I remember sitting down talking to Rick one night. And I said, this is absolute bullshit. I just can't believe that the largest pet store in the US is okay with that. I can't get my mind around how that can possibly be okay. And at the same time, as a dog trainer, I had joined the Association of Pet Dog Trainers in the US and had left it because when I went and looked at my listing on their website, it was surrounded by shock collar trainers and punitive trainers. And I just went, not interested in being around people like that. And I wasn't at the time, the industry had a lot of message boards and Yahoo groups, and I didn't participate in them because I just didn't see the point. That was like the 1990s version of social media, right? Where you went on there, you ranted, you got angry, someone got angry at you, you all slammed the door and off you went. And then the next day you went back and did rinse and repeat. And that for me was asinine. I was like, I live a real life. I don't need to live like that. Rick said to me one night, he said, it's just the industry, right? He said, look at the APDT. And I said, yeah, you're right. And he said, why don't you start an association and do something about it? And I sort of looked at him and said, well, yeah, why not? And he literally got his checkbook out, wrote a check, handed it to me and said, there's your seed money, off you go. And that was the beginning of PPG. Makes me cry even thinking about it.
Oh, I'm still reeling from the story, like the beginning of this story. Like, I think I would commit murder if I saw something like that. I genuinely believe that I would.
And you know what? I told that story for years and I never, ever said the name of the pet store. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, I thought, you know what? Yeah, I am going to, because I think everyone needs to know. And I don't attack people. I'm not the kind of person, I don't judge people. I look at things factually and I'll functionally analyze what you're doing. And then I'm able to categorically, factually say, this is what's happening. This is what the science says. This is what the ethics say. summary of this, not acceptable. So we started PPG. And it's funny because Rebecca King, who is our operations director now, Rebecca was our general manager at the resort. And I went into work on the Monday and I walked into the lobby of it was quite a fancy pet resort. It was one of those sort of very high-end places where the dogs had their own individual rooms, and it was all very foofy. And I went into the lobby and Rebecca was sitting at the front desk, and she was actually covering the front desk for the receptionist who'd gone to lunch. And I said, "Are you guys busy?" She goes, "No, not really." And I said, "Look," I said, "I'm about to start a new endeavor." I said, "Would you be available to do a couple of hours work every day to help me? Obviously we'll pay you." And she said, "Yeah, sure." So I said, "Well, the first thing we're going to do," and I explained to her what we were going to do. I said, "We're just going to throw up a really quick website, put up a manual application form, and we'll just see what we get." So day one, we had like 5 forms, and I went in and she's downloading them, and we'd already established our guiding principles and the fact that this was not going to be a pay and play. There had to be eligibility criteria. You had to adhere to a set of ethical standards, blah, blah, blah. So every application took someone half an hour to go through it, check websites, check social media, make sure that they were who they said they were, approved. Now you can be listed. And I think it was in like the second week I went in one morning. And Rebecca, the front desk was quite high because it was designed to stand behind. And I went, and sometimes I could just see the top of her head over it as I walked into the lobby. And I walked into the lobby and there was this big pile of paperwork on the desk and I couldn't see her behind it. And I went, "Beck, are you there?" And she went, "I'm here." And I said, "What are you doing?" She goes, "These are all the applications that came through the website." And I was like, You're joking. She goes, "I can't get through all these." It's because everyone took like 20 minutes, half an hour. I was like, oh my God. So we very quickly had to invest more money and get an electronic system set up because this manual downloading forms, it was just crazy. And I think by the end of the first year, we had like 1,000 members. I mean, it was ridiculous. So it gave me a real warm and fuzzy because it told me that there were a lot of other people like me that were in the industry, felt the same way and didn't feel they had a home. They didn't necessarily want to be part of other organizations, but they did want to be part of a group for networking and professional development. But they didn't want to be associated with people that were sort of loosey-goosey with their ethics or didn't want to, use sort of ethical approaches or the right philosophy. So it was a really nice feeling. And that was how PPG got started. And that was back in 2012, January 2012.
Yeah,
So
congratulations.
yeah.
I just think that's incredible. And what an
Yeah.
incredible partner you've got to have written you a check and just be like, fly.
Yeah, I mean, he's always been really, really supportive of any of my little endeavors along the way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a leap of faith, but also very much a trust there in you and what you're capable of.
Yeah.
And that's really wonderful.
Yeah.
So the PPG, the Pet Professional Guild, how many members have you got now?
That's a really difficult question to answer, and I'll explain why. So as we grew, then we developed several programs that became sort of standalone programs. So we had Pet Dog Ambassador, and then we had the Shock Free Coalition. And then in 2016, we launched the Pet Professional Accreditation Board. That's an independent organization for credentialing. And then I took the role as the president of Dog Gone Safe, which was a separate nonprofit. And then gradually over the years, we've merged them all together. So between the 4 organizations and the 7 different programs, I think we have about 20,000 people that are in some way involved with the organization. So it's a lot of people.
What would you say the mission is overall? What actually, before the business side of things for the Pet Professional Guild, what would you say is your personal mission in all of this? What drives you forward?
My personal mission is I think every pet deserves a loving home where all their needs are met, physical, emotional, environmental, and that they live happily. That's my mission.
Amazing.
Yeah. And that's every pet has, I don't know where my dogs are right now, but lives like my dogs do. Yeah.
And that's synonymous with the Pet Professional Guild, or is there a different focus?
No, exactly the same. Obviously at PPG. So I'm part of 3 organizations, the Dogsmith, which is now our licensing dog training company. And then when we stopped franchising that and moved it into a license, we pulled away all the educational side of it. So all the education moved to a new company called Dognostics, which is what Louise and I think there's like 7 of us now that work on that. So we provide education for pet professionals and pet owners. So the Dogsmith is my sort of network of trainers that work with me, that I mentor and help from a business perspective. Dognostics is the educational side of the industry in terms of animal behavior and welfare. and then PPG is the nonprofit for pet professionals. So even though they all have very different roles, vision, mission, and values are almost the same of each of them, right? It's just that one's addressing pet owners, one's addressing professionals, and one's an association. But it's all about animals being recognized as sentient beings and being able to fulfill their lives without fear, pain, or force, and where we look after them from an emotional perspective as well as a physical.
Rightly so.
Yeah.
Have you seen any trends over the last couple of years in terms of the types of trainers out there and what demand is available?
What do you mean? Do you mean in terms of
From pet owners, what are they looking for? Are more people looking
Yeah.
for the kind of positive reinforcement?
Absolutely. And it's funny because every year at PPG in November, we do our strategic planning for the next year. So we do a pestle analysis and a SWOT analysis, and we go out into the marketplace and look at what's going on. And I really enjoy doing that. It's something I always did when I manage other people's businesses. And even though we're a pet industry, we still approach it like a business, right? I mean, one of my fundamental responsibilities as the president of PPG is making sure that the organization has longevity and that we're financially sound and that we're able to fulfill our mission. So we do treat it like a business. Now we're not doing everything to make profit. And most of the things we do for our members, we do at break even because we're not designed to, we don't need to make profit. But we do need to generate income because we need to create those programs and policies for our membership. So this November, I actually spent quite a lot of time doing this, and we have access to sort of organizations where we pay to get access to information. And I'm actually doing a presentation to our membership in January on my findings. And I did a presentation to our board of directors and steering committee a couple of weeks ago. And it actually left me feeling really, really good because all the research I did informed me that pet owners perceive force-free trainers as luxury and they're prepared to pay for it, which is absolutely contrary to what a lot of force-free trainers believe. The advocacy has to be driven via the pet owner, which I've always believed. When people have asked me over the years, do you believe in licensing? I've always said, I believe the best oversight in our industry is demands from the consumer. If we can educate consumers and they make the right demands, then anyone that's not training appropriately is going to go out of business. That for me is far more powerful than this sort of mandatory artificial facade of government overseeing our industry. So everything that came back basically spoke about, and it's one of the reasons why next year, entire mission at PPG is going to be advocating to pet owners to help educate them so they put pressure on the industry, and advocating to pet professionals and providing them the tools and resources so that they can apply that second level of pressure on the industry. Because I don't think in my lifetime we are going to get the industry where I would like to see it, but I do think we're not far off from a tipping point because there's so much happening in the industry right now. There's so many key players that are being pressured into making decisions that they're probably not very comfortable or wouldn't choose to be making, but they're making the right decisions because I think they realize that they need to be on the right side of history here and that this is the way the industry is starting to move. So, and when I presented to our steering committee, they all were like, wow, this is really good. Because I think when you're in the trenches, you don't necessarily see the impact you're having until you step back and say, what's happened over the last year in terms of the industry, and what's happening with when you just look at where consumers now are spending money on enrichment. They're spending more money on training. They're buying enrichment type of toys. They're investing in sort of daycare facilities. So the consumer is looking at their animal as a sentient being and saying, yes, there's an emotional side of this animal that we need to look after as importantly as the physical, if not more. And that's now where the purchasing power is, which says that you've got an educated pet owner. I mean, millions of dollars being spent on snuffle mats and enrichment toys. I mean, 5 years ago, we wouldn't have seen that, right? The types of dog food that are now being purchased, the types of facilities that are opening that are becoming very successful, says that pet owners are becoming more discerning about where they're putting their money because they look at these animals and these animals are family members and they deserve it and they want it. So that gives me a really nice, warm and fuzzy feeling because I think that's the block that is going to really impact our industry, not the professionals. The pet owners are going to impact the industry.
Absolutely. Social pressure is so important. I was just speaking with Marissa Heath yesterday, who is politician, and she was saying that they are also bypassing government and taking the social pressure route because it will be most effective. I think there's definitely a long way to go from where I'm sitting, but what I would love to see is more kind of a smarter, more integrated interspecies living. like you were saying earlier, there was a difference in the UK versus the US with regards to how many dogs you might see in a cafe or a pub or, a bar type of thing. But within that, I personally would like to take it a step further and accommodate the dogs rather than them having to be an afterthought.
Yeah.
Be on your lead, sit under the table, be quiet, don't make a noise, because that's not right either, surely. But everything in steps and stages, shifting the collective consciousness, I guess, is the primary priority, and then
Yeah.
applying that pressure so people can make change.
I mean, here's an example. About 6 years ago, I was interviewing someone on a podcast and we were talking about enrichment, and we were talking about it in line with sort of pet sitting and pet care. And I said to the person that one of the things that I thought we'd done a really good job at the Dogsmith is that we didn't do 15 or 20-minute pet care visits that were just throwing food and water down. We actually went into the home and integrated other activities into that visit, like snuffle mats, like Kongs, like dog walks, like scent work, recognizing that pet care is more than just feeding and watering a dog. We also always had a sort of double-ended control system. So when the animal was first met, we did a very much a sort of observational ethogram of the animal so that we knew what this animal looked like when the animal was relaxed and happy. So that when the owner goes away and you then go into the pet's home, you have a baseline to measure against. So you can say, yeah, the pet's okay. Their demeanor's the same. You can, because you can't look after someone's pet unless you are observing and monitoring and you have a baseline of which to observe and monitor from. And we were talking about enrichment. And at the end of this podcast, I thought, we need to completely rethink about how we do these pet sitting visits. They shouldn't be pet sitting visits. It should be enrichment visits. People should be trained to go in and do enrichment visits with pets. So we put together Louise and I put together this canine enrichment technician program, which it covers about 64 enrichment exercises across the 7 categories: cognitive, physical, auditory, visual, etc. It teaches the trainer the fundamental skills they need to do that. So leash handling skills, scenting skills, etc. And then the very last module is about enrichment assessment. It provides all the forms and the training so that a trainer or an enrichment technician can go into a home and objectively assess the home, the size, the views, the garden, the access, the safety, the welfare, can assess the pet and assess the owner, so that from that you can make a determination as to what we can best implement into this pet's life. And then we provide the training, so the technician can either do the training or they can train the owner to do the training, so that pets are living much more enriched, fulfilled lives. And we developed this thinking that wouldn't it be great if we could sell a few of these and people would have completely reframe this whole. So rather than being a pet sitter, you're a canine enrichment technician. And that's what you do. We have sold more of those courses than any other course, probably more than 1,000. People just love it. And it's probably about 60 hours of training. And it's designed so that if you're not a dog trainer, you can do it and pass and have the skills where you can then, so if you're a dog walker or a pet sitter, you can then sort of put another skill to your toolkit. And I love it because I think the days, as a pet parent, and I tell the story all the time to our team, when I first moved to the house we're in now, which was about 1.5 years ago, my brother-in-law has always looked after our animals for the last 35 years. And he died last year.
I'm sorry.
And selfishly, I had this massive panic. I was like, shit, who's going to look after my animals? I don't trust them with anybody else. So I phoned 9 pet sitters in my area and I invited them all to come and I interviewed them all one by one. Not one of them had any formal education, any formal skills, no business insurance. And I was horrified, absolutely horrified. And these people were all successful business people in this area. So I whittled it down to 3 that were my favorite in terms of appearance, demeanor, professionalism, articulation, and how I thought they would naturally interact with animals. And I then said to all 3 of them, I will pay to train you. I will pay you to train you. And I'll give you access to some of our programs at Dognostics, our pet first aid program, our canine enrichment technician program, our pet care certification program. One of them said, no, thanks, not interested. I was like, okay. And the other 2 both did them. And then I chose, so I've got one as a primary and the other one as a backup. And that's what I had to do to skill up and train somebody that I'm now comfortable saying, you can come into my home and look after my pets. And I just thought, how do other people manage? What do they do when they don't have, I have access to all these resources that I can just say, here you go, do this. And then I paid them, I think they did something like 6 visits each. They came to the house 6 times with me. and I took them through house orientation, pet profile forms, pet first aid, feeding schedules, Kong stuffing, enrichment maps, walking around our property because we live on land. And I just thought, that's the level of care that everybody should get when they go on vacation or they leave their pets with a professional. It shouldn't be the kid from next door that's now graduated to working at the supermarket that's doing it on the weekends but doesn't have any training.
Yes. 100% agree with you. Do you know what I really, really love about this? I mean, obviously there will be costs associated with that. And, very much in the UK, it's cost of living crisis. There's a lot of factors. I'm sure people will listen to this and be like, oh, that's going to cost me a pretty penny. I've got other priorities. But what I absolutely love about what you achieved with the canine technician, canine enrichment technician program, that's not just marketing. That's not just rebranding something to make it sound more interesting. That's actually solving a real problem, but reframing in the consumer's brain that, yes, you're solving the problem, but you get them to care. Yes, exactly. I think that's genius, genuinely genius. And we could do a lot more things with that perspective to try and shift the
Absolutely. Yeah. And you see, and that for me is one of those sort of things that you do that you say, we've got to stop looking at pet care as just the kid next door or even the adult next door that doesn't have any training, right? I mean, at a minimum, anyone working with animals should understand the language. They should understand what the animal is communicating. Is the animal stressed? Are they happy? Are they fearful? At a minimum, everyone should have pet first aid. At an absolute minimum. That is the minimum. And, if you look at diagnostics as an example, our canine enrichment technician program is $100. We deliberately left it at that price because we want it saturating the marketplace. Yeah. So as a professional, if you take that and the pet first aid, which is going to cost $60, you have then got the minimum requirements to go and work with animals.
I think the UK probably government level need to introduce some kind of license where those are two prerequisites potentially, or something similar to get people, no, you don't need a license, as in like an annual license or anything like that. But like, you want to own a pet, show me that you've done these qualifications. That would solve so many problems. And those people who are just impulsive for the sake of wanting that Instagram photo or whatever, they will thankfully, hopefully think twice before making such huge life-changing decisions for another living being.
I mean, I remember when I first started, I had the theory of learning theory and all the sort of funky, geeky stuff. But I mean, at the time, I was living in Florida. I put myself through a distance learning course with a woman called Deborah Bragg, who lived in Cumbria in England, because it was the only course that was available at the time. I still have the binders somewhere. I keep them on my shelf as a reminder of years gone by. And that was like 27 years ago. And then after that, I remember doing a Penn Foster online course through some university in the US. And I did vet tech and groomer and dog trainer and veterinary assistant because I was just looking at grabbing everything I could. Because for me as a professional in an industry, you wouldn't even contemplate opening up a business in another industry without at least having some education and skills. I mean, that would be, of course you wouldn't do that. Well, millions, thousands of people do that.
Yeah, it's a real issue.
Yeah, and it's amazing because most people would not just hand their child over to somebody, but they're quite happy to just hand, like your friend in New York that handed that dog over.
Yeah. What's really interesting here is how perceptions have changed over time. I think historically, someone says, I'm a hairdresser. You would assume they're qualified to be a hairdresser, right? They know how to cut hair. And so if someone says, oh, I'm a dog trainer, you would assume that they are qualified to be a dog trainer. But so many people are not, and it's not regulated. There's no oversight on it. So it creates consequences. And also it creates this kind of mistrust where people just don't know who to trust or who to believe these days. And there's definitely something missing there. I commend you for creating the Pet Professional Guild. I just think it's wonderful. And then also Dognostics. I'm going to be taking that course myself because I think I'm not a pet professional, but even as a dog guardian, those are
yeah.
I cannot satisfy my Galga. Like literally, she goes on 2.5 walks, 3 walks a day, long sniffs, free everything. We do loads of enrichment, and still most of the day I'm working and she's just looking at me, waiting for me to finish. So there must be other more creative ways to provide her with the stimulation that she needs. And it's great to know that this solution is out there.
Absolutely. And just teaching people basic scenting skills. I mean, I don't know, I should know this because Robert Hewings is a really good, and Karen are good friends of mine who are in the UK, who are probably the best scent instructors that I've ever come across. I think something like 75% of the dog's brain is controlled through the nose. And I remember when I brought them out to the US about 8 years ago to do a workshop at my training facility, and just became absolutely obsessed with scent work. And my Aussie, and I haven't done scent work with either of my dogs for a long time. And then last Sunday, funnily enough, I had a scent workshop here. And after everybody had gone, and I don't do a lot of client training anymore because I'm busy with diagnostics and PPG, but I always have 5 clients on my roster because I like to keep my hand in. And I end up with all these border collie owners who want to do agility, and they've got behavioral problems. So I've had the same clients for years. And we did some scent stuff a couple of Sundays ago. And after they'd gone, my husband let my dogs out, and they came charging down to the training facility, and the scent stuff was already out. And I thought, while I've got it out, I'll do some stuff with them. And I hadn't done scent work with Doogie, who's my Aussie, for probably, 2 years. And he hadn't forgotten any of it, ran her through a couple of scent courses. And then about an hour later, my husband said, "What have you done to Doogie? She's absolutely crashed out." And I said, "Yeah, I have to remind myself how exhausted they get." She used to run with me. I could run her 10 miles and she'd get home and be like, "What's next?" I do half an hour scent work with her and she's lying on her back upside down with her feet in the air.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't actually know that. Okay, I need to walk my dog twice a day, maybe if they're lucky, and then tick, that's it, done. Yeah. So scent work is definitely another thing to go research.
But even walking, there's walking and there's walking, right? I mean, when I have land, so I don't take my dogs out on leashes very often. But when I do, we literally go out for a designated period of time, and the dogs do whatever they want. And if they only want to go 20 minutes down the road, but that takes an hour because they're so engrossed in smells, I'm fine with that. Because it's not about a route round the block, let's go for a walk. It's about, this is your experience, do with it what you want.
Yeah. Even if it's on a lead, like just being.
Yeah. This is, if I take them off the property, I take them on leashes, but I literally just say, okay, whatever you want. And if they want to sort of go gung ho, great. And if they don't, if we only get to the end of the road because there's so much enrichment in the smells, and that's fine too.
And that's fine. Exactly.
They don't care. They just want to be out enjoying themselves.
Exactly. And sniff the P-mail. You were saying at the beginning that you're actually really excited about the future and hopeful. Up until this point, I haven't actually felt that elsewhere from, kind of, it feels a little bit like there's a ever so slightly dark cloud looming over us because, world issues, loads of crises, the cost of living. It feels sometimes like life is just kind of like getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And of course, dogs suffer as a consequence, dogs and other animals. But you're very optimistic and very positive. What would you say is one of the main factors driving that?
I think it's the research that I did last month, and the fact that all the purchasing trends in the industry all point towards informed pet owners making educated decisions, buying the right supplies, the right type of food, the right type of services, which makes me feel really, really good from the pet owner perspective. And then from the pet professional perspective, over the last month, we've had 3 of the largest organizations all dropping Lima and all choosing new models to move towards, which are almost aligned with our guiding principles and our best practice model. And I've watched those 3 organizations over the last 7 years sort of gradually etching slowly forwards towards that line where I think where the ethical line is. And they're doing it because of pressure from the industry, whether that's pressure from PPG, whether it's pressure from pet professionals saying, I'm a member and you guys need to rethink what we're doing. So I think that is really, really promising. I mean, look, if you look at the world in general, we could all get doom and gloom between the politics and the wars and God knows what else is going on. But if you actually look at the research, there is a general move back towards the middle. I mean, I think as humans, we just tend to focus on the negative, don't we? Because that's our survival mechanism, is to watch out and be alerted to anything that could be on the horizon. But in our industry, there are a lot of really strong indicators just with some of the technology that's now selling and the AI that's becoming popular in the industry. I just felt really good about what I was seeing, to the point where I put together a PowerPoint presentation. I was like so excited. I was like, oh my God. Normally I would just do a sort of a 2-page document. This is what we're doing, blah, 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 blah. This is where the marketplace is. What do you guys want to do next year? And this year I was like, okay, this is telling us where we need to be going next year. We need to be leveraging the fact that the pet owners more educated, they're making the right decisions. There's a tip where we're near a tipping point. Some of the technological advancements that are coming in our industry, which are moving away from sort of the technology of shock collars to the technology of enrichment devices and all that kind of fun stuff. So I just felt really good. And I did talk to a lot of dog trainers as well. And I talked to a lot of consumers because of my role at PPG. And often I talk to dog trainers that are in isolated areas that go, God, Niki, I don't know what to do. I'm thinking about closing. And I'm like, no, this is a time when we push forwards because we're almost at the tipping point. And they go, well, I just don't see it. I see it. I talk to trainers all over the world, literally, who are telling me that phone calls are now up in terms of pet owners asking for specific types of training, which they never experienced before. Pet owners say, having thrown a trainer in the gut because they're like, no, I'm not doing that with my dog. I'm sorry. I'm going to go find someone that can help me. And that for me is very, very positive because we just haven't seen that in the past.
That's
We haven't
super
seen it.
positive. That gives me a load of hope,
Yeah.
really. Because this podcast exists because of things I've observed and realized, like,
Yeah.
we need to do something.
I mean, the shock collar lawsuit in California that PPG was, I don't know if you're familiar with that. There was a class action lawsuit that they just had to pay out almost $2 million. And a lot of people don't know this, but we were very instrumental in that. About 3 or 4 years ago, we got a phone call from a lawyer in Atlanta who had come across, I don't know how, I don't remember how this came about, but she literally was a young lawyer who just got her first job having passed the bar and somehow, shape or form had become educated about shock collars and how damaging they were and wanted to do something. So she decided that she spoke to her boss and said, can I do a pro bono? And her boss said, if you can find somebody that's got teeth in the game, yeah. So she approached somebody else who said, get hold of Niki at PPG. So I got this email off her. And when I first read it, I thought, that's probably spam. It's not real. But, you phone just to be on the safe side. And sure enough, she was looking for a pet owner in California whose dog had been harmed by a shock collar. And I said, well, I can find you hundreds of professionals. She goes, no, has to be a pet owner because pet professionals should know better. We need a pet owner that has bought a shock collar unknowingly and has got their dog's been harmed. So we found a gentleman, Hernandez, in California, whose dog had its neck burnt through a shock collar, made the connection, and the lawsuit went ahead. We were a witness and had to do depositions. And through a colleague of mine, Dr. Zazie Todd, who's lovely. Zazie's adorable. You will love her. She's awesome. One night, our lawyer phoned me and said, we need to collate all the research papers we can about positive reinforcement training. And I said, okay, because we were putting together a discovery for the lawsuit. And I said, well, we've got a lot at PPG because all our position statements have been well cited. I said, but I know somebody who has a really good collection. And I emailed Zazie, and within about 2 hours, they all came flying over. So we sent the lawyer this massive discovery package of all our position statements and every scientific study that's been done on training, and not just training, but the ethics, everything. So we were actually named, PPG was named in the lawsuit, which I was so proud of. And then about 8 months ago, our lawyer phoned us and said, you're going to have to fly to California to do depositions. I was like, fine, that's fine. Done depositions before and understand the process. And then heard nothing and nothing and nothing, and a year, nothing. And I'm thinking, oh, shoot, this is going to get thrown out. And then our lawyer, Jim Hout, emailed one day and said, judge is settling it. It's going to class action. And I was like, yay! And of course, and at the time, and I wanted to go out and scream and shout. And he's like, don't say anything, because we don't want to alert the other side. We don't want to create this massive movement of anti-lawsuit. And the IACP is very strong on advocacy. That's the association that believes that every tool is available to dog trainers. And then about 3 months ago, I got an email off our lawyer saying the class action lawsuit's been approved. And this is how, and then it got handed down like a month ago. So that's another really good sign, because some of our members got a little bit frustrated with us a few months ago because we didn't jump very quickly onto the New Jersey legislation to license dog trainers. And we didn't for several reasons. One, because I didn't think it was ever going to get out of the house. Two, we're not constituents in New Jersey, and most lawmakers are not interested in talking to you unless you're a constituent. And three, we have limited resources and limited time, and all our time and resources was going behind this shot collar lawsuit, because now that it's passed, we can now categorically go into the marketplace and say Radio Systems had to pay $2 million and had to publicly apologize and admit that their shot collars are dangerous to dogs. And that, for me, from an advocacy perspective, was way more powerful than one state potentially licensing dog trainers and grandfathering all the shot collar trainers in, which is exactly what the congressman told me would happen when I spoke to him. So that's another sign in our industry that things are starting to happen, because 5 years ago, that wouldn't have even got off the ground. And that's massive, because now you're going to have legal precedent set. And now there's going to be now it's going to open the floodgates to all kinds of other lawsuits.
Yes, fingers and toes crossed. However, slight caveat, in many cases, those are just going to be rebranded.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But the fact that they had to come out publicly and say, yes, these tools are dangerous and they can cause harm. And I don't remember off the top of my head how many people were in the class action lawsuit, but there was a significant number. So, I mean, that for me is great, because that now, that puts us in a much stronger position to advocate to pet owners, because now it's not just us saying it, right? The law has said, the company who makes them has said, yes, they're dangerous. And I was always amazed that, because I have all the guides, I've got the instruction guides on all these shot collars, and they all say in there at some point, can cause this, and this. But who reads an instruction manual?
No one, especially a desperate dog owner, where they look for a quick solution, and then all of a sudden it's like, I need to figure out how to use this tool. And in figuring out how to use the tool, there's going to be trial and error, and who's going to suffer? The dogs.
And we also have to realize as well that some pet owners do get themselves in very difficult situations with animals. And by the time they get to us, they are angry, they're frustrated, they're embarrassed, it's impacted their family life. It's maybe they can no longer have visitors in their home. They've had to move their entire life round to accommodate a dog's schedule. So, I'm not suggesting in any way that it's okay to shock a dog. But then when you make a phone call and a professional says, I can fix this for you, pet owners that do not know any other or do not know better are going to say, help now, come. In the same way that I did in Hawaii in 2000, when I said, help, come now, I was lucky that the person that came was a positive reinforcement dog trainer. Now, I don't think for a minute, if it had been a shot collar trainer, that I would have said, yep, give me that and put it on my dog. But a lot of people would have done, because the problems that were being faced at home were insurmountable and were overwhelming. So some trainers say pet owners should know better in this day and age. Positive reinforcement's been around for long enough. And I think that's really unfair, because there are still people that smoke. There are still people that, as humans, we have this amazing ability to know that we should do something, but don't have the ability or the motivation to actually do it, because these topics can be very complex. And then cognitive bias and all kinds of other paradigms come into play. The two self theory of, the short term and the long term self. There are a lot of reasons why. It's the reason why the health industry is one of the biggest industries in the world, right? People are overweight and they're unhealthy, and they know that it could have serious consequences, but they still don't get up in the morning and go for a run. It's very complicated for people. It's not a simple case of willpower or intent or motivation. There's a lot of other things at play. So I don't blame the pet owners, because there are a lot of people that are living in environments where they don't have access to positive reinforcement training. They maybe haven't read the book or seen the TV show. For me, it's on the professional to not be offering that type of advice, given that we know all the side effects and the impacts.
There are dog owners, dog guardians who also listen to this podcast. And I'm wondering if you can give them some guidance, specifically in the US, more so, because that's where you're based. But do they find the right trainer for their dogs? Do they specifically look for accreditation, as in Pet Professional Guild accreditation? What are some of the signs? I know that you said that some people will already say positive reinforcement, but I guess on the off chance that somebody who's never been doesn't know what that means. What do they look for? They're looking for a dog trainer. What do they look for?
Well, I think you have to, first of all, you have to rely on going to the right locations to find a dog trainer. So the Pet Professional Guild, Karen Pryor Academy, Jean Donaldson's Academy, Pat Miller's Academy. There are a lot of organizations that you can go to where you're going to be finding professionals that are adhering to a code of conduct or an ethical statement. But then you have to compound that with the fact that there are some people so as an example, there are members of the Pet Professional Guild that don't necessarily have a formal credential, and they might be really good dog trainers because they might have mentored under the right people or done self-study. But then you also have a lot of dog trainers that have paid for good education and gone to good schools, but maybe don't agree or conform to the ethics. So you're looking at it, it's sort of a Gordian knot. You're looking at it that the ethics have got to be in place. So I would be advising pet owners, you have to find dog trainers that not only believe in doing no harm, but they also believe in doing good. You have to find a dog trainer that will categorically explain to you how they are going to train your dog. And you have to be able to ask them, if my dog does something that you don't like, how are you going to respond? What are you going to do? And if a dog trainer says that they're going to use any type of scary punishment or equipment, then run fast and go find somebody who's not going to. So there are some good landing places where you can start. But, it's a combination of ethics and knowledge and skills. There are a lot of people that are credentialed academically only. Well, dog training is a procedural job and declarative knowledge is not enough. You've got to have procedural skills. And some schools and accreditations don't test for those. So this is why it's a problem for pet owners, right? I mean, it's already taking me way longer than it should to articulate how you find a dog trainer, because I should be able to say, go here and you will find someone that is good. And it's not that simple. It's not that simple. So You've got organizations like the Pet Professional Guild that we have on our website, on our directory page, we actually have a form that you can fill out if you're looking for somebody. We will help you find somebody in your area. So if you don't find somebody in our directory because you can't find someone proximity, fill out the form and we'll get back to you within 24 hours, because so many dog trainers now are working virtually as well that doesn't matter where you live anymore. You can access some of the best dog trainers in the world just by jumping on Zoom. And it can be just as effective.
How many of those trainers actually train the human?
It's funny you say that, because I rolled out a course about 6 months ago. My background is people training. And I always recognize that all the schools, with the exception of Dognostics, I think this is accurate. We are the only school that teaches people training as well as dog training, and it's all part of the curriculum. And we teach experiential learning, we teach motivational interviewing, we teach project management, we teach change management, we teach all the aspects that somebody needs to be working with and teaching people. Because at the end of the day, most of us don't train dogs, we train people to train dogs. And that is a very different skill set than training dogs. And it's why when dog trainers say, I don't like working with people, you think, well, maybe you should go work in another industry. Because I've yet to come across a dog that arrives at my facility driving its own vehicle and banishing its own credit card. I mean, that's just not the way it works, people. They come with humans, right? And we can't impact the dog without impacting the human.
From a dog trainer's perspective, how would you recommend they assess or make choices or stay ethical, considering that they are potentially turning people away, knowing that people are looking for quick fixes and the only real way to get that quick fix resolved is through using aversive tools? You know what I mean? So you've got like, okay, I've got to turn this client away. That's potential money in my pocket. You know what I mean? Like, how do people make that choice when it comes to surviving as a business and making sure that they eat and pay their bills, et cetera, et cetera? Because I think that there's a tension that exists there. It's wrong.
There's lots of solutions for it. First of all, most dog trainers don't charge what they're worth, and they sell by the hour, which makes them a tradesman, rather than selling by the program, which makes them an expert, where you can charge more. There's also this concept of yield management that is quite new in our industry. We teach at Dognostics that you can have different tier pricing based on demand, which is a model that I brought from the hotel industry. So revenue management, which is really important. And I love revenue management because if you have premium slots in the evening and at the weekend where you can charge premium rates, then that opens up other slots during the week where you can help people that don't have as much money, because you're able to offer services at a lower price, a standardized, more sort of economical service. Because most people that get into dog training do so because of their love of animals and they don't want to turn clients away. But ultimately, it is a business and we have to put food on our own table, right? So there is a model where you can be selective about the clients you work with. I mean, even though I only have a few clients, we have a program at Dognostics called Business Smarts, which is a 6-month mentoring program, which includes everything from, pricing and marketing and selling ethically. And one of the things that we talk about is that you can't service every client. So choose the clients you want to work with. You only have probably 20 or 25 perishable hours a week on your schedule. So if you go for low hanging fruit, you're going to be the first business going out of business. So develop your services based on your target market and based on their needs, based on their pets, right? Price it accordingly and put some yield management in place so that you maximize your revenue while also being empowered enough to be able to help people that can't necessarily afford it. So I keep a couple of slots a week. Fridays is a good example for me. On Fridays, I work with a couple of rescue organizations. And on Friday, I only take rescue clients and I don't charge them. And I'm able to do that because I'm financially comfortable and I run a profitable business. So I don't have to be busting my gut 5 days a week to bring money in. But if I don't sustain a business, I can't offer those rescue people that period, right? So a lot of the pushback we get when we do business consulting is, but I don't want to charge too much. I want to help people. Well, if you charge the right amount for your services in your premium hours, you can help more people that can't afford it because you've already covered your own needs. If you try to do everything for cheap, you're going to be able to help less people and you're probably going to be out of business and going back to a full-time job working in a bank. So there is a way to do it. It's a business, right? It's a business and you have to create your products and price them appropriately and sell them appropriately so that you can help as many people as you can help. But you also shouldn't be afraid to turn people down because they're not your kind of people. I mean, even with only my 5 clients, I do a free 15-minute Zoom intake with any client. And they know when they get on that Zoom that I'm interviewing you to decide if you can come onto my training roster. Because I can't take very many clients. I'm not going to work with people that philosophically are not on board because as soon as I touch your dog, I'm emotionally invested and I'm not going to be heartbroken in 4 weeks when you tell me that you put a shock collar on your dog. So that doesn't mean that you have to be fully on board with my methods right from day one, but you have to be open to the possibilities and the opportunities of it. And if you're the kind of person that I believe is going to be fully on board and you've got your dog's best intentions at heart, then let's do this. But if you come to that first meeting and categorically are absolutely fine with screaming and shouting at your dog or grabbing them by the scruff of the neck, and anything that I say in opposition to that gets a yeah, but, then we're not a good match. I'm not going to work with you. I only have so many hours in the day and I want to work with the kind of people that I feel I can most impact. And that's not people that are going to argue with me every lesson because they don't agree with the system or the approach. Did that answer your question?
It did. Yes, it did. I think that it's like I said, there's that tension that exists. I think a lot of people know in their heart of hearts that balance training is not the optimal solution for the dogs or their clients. But I feel like from the feedback I received, they're forced to make a choice, as in take on the client and do things that way, not because the client wants it, but because the client wants results quickly. And that just happens to be the solution because the clients don't want to wait for positive reinforcement because it takes longer.
Well, actually, you know what? The research doesn't show that. The research shows that it's just as efficient as punitive training. And I think what you have to do is you have to be very careful about defining training, right? Because if I put a shock collar on a dog and zap them so they no longer bark, that's not actually training. That's behavior suppression. And I think the other caveat to this as well is that I don't think every client can afford to either fiscally or time go through an extensive behavior modification program. And often when I do an intake with clients and I've sort of functionally assessed what's going on and I'm able to create a hypothesis about what I believe we need to be doing, and then I can talk to them about options, there's always 2 options. And option 1 is management, antecedent control, which is, no exposure to the problematic stimulus. An option is a full behavior modification program. And often management is enough because it resolves the issue and it's more affordable and it happens more quickly. And a lot of clients are more than happy to do that, to put some management in place. And if the behavior is no longer triggered, they're fine with that.
So the management is down to the dog or the human? It's the human, isn't it?
It's human. I mean, an example would be, just a really basic example would be a dog that barks at certain times of the day. Well, yes, I mean, you can do a fancy training program and you can change stimulus control so that the doorbell going no longer elicits the bark. It teaches the dog to go run to the crate. We can do that. That's easy. But it's only easy if the client wants to do 2 or 3 lessons and work on setups. Or the other alternative is to relocate the crate and during problem times of the day, put the dog in the crate with a Kong, or put the dog in a situation where it's got enrichment, or take away the emotional need for the dog to bark. I mean, these are all very quick solutions that can be put in place. So you're preventing exposure to the problematic antecedent. And there's so many ways that we can do that we can manage behavior as opposed to actually change behavior, which is a lot more affordable for people.
And it makes them also more responsible in that process. It's 50-50, right, isn't it? Yeah. I really like that. I really love the way that you've come at this, the way you thought about things, the systemization of things. Like, it's really refreshing, and I can understand why you're so highly regarded in the industry.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. What a privilege to have spoken with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.